Unfortunately, it's not going to live stream, but we'll record it and we'll get it put up on the internet as soon as we can. Alan, are you able to get anything put up onto the website to say the video will be posted as soon as possible? Is that something we can do now, or is it?
It's probably too late because that's only Becky and Ross that can do that.
I'll see if I can do it through the Modern Gov on the Planning Committee page. Just to put a message on to say the live stream failed, but the recording will be posted. On that basis, Chairman, are you happy to make a start?
I am, yes. So I'm going to read out the Chairman's opening comments. Regrettably, this isn't being live streamed, but I'm going to treat this as though it will be obviously published for the benefit of the public in due course. Welcome. During the COVID-19 pandemic, virtual planning committee meetings are taking place. This is the first planning committee meeting that we've held on a virtual basis, and there are therefore changes to the way that the committee will operate. May I remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast via the internet and a record will be archived for future viewing. We are using the Webex system this evening, and members and officers will be communicating via that system. As set out in the agenda papers and on the website, any member of the press and public may listen to the proceedings at this virtual meeting via a web link which has been publicised on the council website. Participants in this meeting will be the councillors concerned and the officers advising the committee. Any members of the public or ward members registered to speak in the public speaking arrangements and who have submitted a written statement will have that read out at the relevant time in the meeting. These arrangements do not allow for any additional material to be presented over and above the written statement. May I remind officers and members participating this evening that during the meeting all participants are in control of their own microphones. You must place your microphone on mute whilst not speaking on an item. As the chairman, I will use my discretion as to order in which participants speak and will announce whom I wish to speak to. The nominated speaker should then unmute their microphone and mute it after they have finished their contribution. May I remind members that they should not use the chat facility, as this is only for the chairman and officers to use. With regard to declarations, if a declaration is required after the meeting has started, this should be announced in the usual manner. With regard to voting, I may remind members of the committee that you are only allowed to participate in the vote if you have been present for the whole agenda item, including the officer presentation and debate. If you lose visual connection during the agenda item, you are still allowed to vote. However, if you lose sound or audio connection during the item, you must not vote and have the vote recorded as an abstention. Voting will be in the usual manner of showing hands. However, this will be confirmed by a name call after the vote has taken place to ensure that the votes have been recorded accurately. With regard to the debate during the consideration of the agenda items, the usual procedure rules apply to the debate, and I, as chairman, will have absolute discretion. With regard to adjournment, if I, as the chairman, wish to adjourn the meeting at any point, I will announce the adjournment and inform you as to how long that shall last, and all participants should remain in the Webex meeting facility with your microphone muted. There will now be a roll call to confirm the members are present at the meeting. The councillors who are members of the planning committee and are present are as follows: Councillor Allen, Councillor Cole, Councillor Goff, Councillor Grinsell, who is vice chairman of this committee, Councillor Hull Allen, myself, Councillor Richard Holt as chairman, Councillor McNaughton, Councillor Ryan, and Councillor Slater. The other participants in the meeting will be council officers and not elected members. So I'm going to start with the agenda. If we can turn to the papers that we have in front of us on the agenda. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence, and I'll pause for a moment there to let the clerk confirm whether we have any apologies. I don't think we do because we're all here.
There are no apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. Declarations of interest.
I think received.
Should that become apparent during the course of the meeting that there should be a declaration, members are of course required to declare it. Requests of members to address the committee, requests of members to address the meeting, item 3.
No members have requested to address the meeting, Chairman.
Item 4, questions and deputations.
No questions or deputations have been received.
Thank you. Item 6 is minutes of the previous meeting, which are set out at pages 5 to 8 of the pack of documents that you have. Could I pause for a moment to enable you to locate those papers?
They're fine.
Could I call for I think that was a proposal by Councillor Hollallen, I think.
Yes.
Who's proposed there a true record. And can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Grinsley is raising his hand, and I'll take that as a second. Thank you very much. Item 7 is the Solihull local plan policies, which are for noting, which then brings us on to item 8, which is the first substantive matter of the agenda, which is the power gen site at Haslocks Green Road. We found at pages 11 to 28 of your pack, and I'd invite Officer Kim Allen to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks to vary condition 1 of the permission provided in 2017. The proposal reads to vary condition number 1, changes to elevations of extra care building as listed on the drawings and including a height in building in parts. It also seeks to remove condition 7 on planning permission from 2015. Now, the members amongst you will recognise Power Gen. It's a landmark building in the borough, and this was first granted planning permission in 2015. The development comprises of an extra care retirement village, which has 261 units of accommodation, and all of that is for affordable units. The scheme carried on to include 113 dwellings, as well as a petrol filling station and associated landscaping. And also, I think it's fair to say that this development, it was a significant piece of the jigsaw in urban regeneration of the heart of Shirley. Members will know that opposite is the Powergate development. And Joe, can we have the PowerPoint, please? Is that available? Okay, right. Thank you, Joe. That's super. So, if you just go through to the first slide, which is the location. So, as you can see, members, this is the power gen site, and in particular, it highlights the extra care unit, which is where the 261 units are, and that is the prominent position at the gyratory with Stratford Road. So it has elevations to the Stratford Road and Haslocks Green Road. Can I have the second slide, please, Joe? Thank you. This slide provides the development as it has been built. Now, in 2017, members of the committee determined an allied application which sought to provide some design build changes to the building, and those were granted at that time. Joe, can I have the next slide, please? Joe, thank you. Thank you. Now, members, this slide in front of you demonstrates a mix between the fallback position of 2017 and what the changes are now. Now, I recognise there's a lot of information on that slide in front of you, but essentially, if you look at the elevation on the bottom left-hand side where the building is marked in white, you can see near the top of the parapet there's a dashed red line. Now, that red line carries on along all these stepped stories of the building leading up to the tower, which is on the junction of the gyratory. Back in 2017, these stories, the wings, which face onto Haslock's Green Road, they're between 4 and 8 stories. They had planning permission to increase the height of that elevation by 0.75 of a metre, and indeed the story height of the tower increased in height by 1.54 metres. Members will know the development is as good as complete now, and essentially this proposal seeks to regularise what has been built. So today we are asking members to consider the changes in height that have actually been borne out, and the changes have come about because of the differences in the floor plates of the different floors of the buildings. So for the wings have actually grown in height from 2017, and they are an additional 0.5 metres higher, and that equates to 1.25 metres higher than the original permitted scheme back in 2015. But the tower is actually lower than the fallback of 2017. So the tower remains half a metre lower than it could be from 2017, and in fact is just 1.04 metres higher altogether. There are a number of other changes to the building. These are set out in your report on pages 14 and 15, bullet points at the bottom of the page. So there's window and door design changes. Some windows are omitted, some doors were double doors, now they're single doors. There's some minor changes to materials. And I'd like to point out that actually the development now has more balconies provided to the apartments within. The balconies are smaller than the original consent, but again, in my mind, the planning benefit is that there are more of them. The scheme, as I say, seeks to regularise these. Another element of the scheme relates to seeking to provide the detail required within the original planning consent, and that relates to condition 4. Now, Joe, can you just put your mouse, please, on the bottom left-hand side of the screen at elevation 2? Thank you. Now, this relates to the condition 7. That's the southern elevation of the building, and it's visible when you look towards Shirley Village Centre. And again, there has been more detailing has been expressed on that elevation. It's quite modest, but there are columns added to the elevation that helps to define the undercroft parking beneath, and there are some slight changes to the fenestration. Combined, officers feel that the scheme is acceptable. I think the changes are indiscernible to the street scene, and certainly the changes sought to the elevation 2 are considered sufficient to discharge that condition. So for those reasons, together with the variation to the section 106 attached to the original scheme, we are recommending approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Kim. I intend to move the motion. It's my responsibility to start the debate. Council standing orders require me to move the motion. Although I am moving the motion, I am still undecided on how I will vote. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Chairman.
Councillor Grinsell, thank you very much. So, could I ask, please, members to raise their hands if they would like to address the committee, so I can make a note of their name in my book. Councillor McNaughton, if you could just pause for a moment, Councillor McNaughton, as I make a note of members in the order I see them. Councillor Allen. Councillor Ryan, I can only see your head, top of your head. Councillor Hull Allen. Councillor Grinsell. I can't see any others wanting to speak at the moment. Obviously, as the debate develops, you may want to speak. Obviously, raise your hand, but it will require me, remember, to flick through the pictures. So if I do miss you, please then unmute your microphone at appropriate time and let me know. So, Councillor McNaughton, if you'd like to start, please.
Thank you. I think I can see that what's being proposed here isn't a significant change on what fallback position is. So I don't have any problems with it as a whole. I do have a couple of small questions that I'd be interested to get the answer to. And the first one of those is on page 15. One of the things that's mentioned along with the balconies, changes in size and increase in the number, is the removal of a brise soleil. I just wondered whether there are any consequences of that, or if it's purely cosmetic. Does it affect the energy rating or anything like that of the building? And the other one really is half of this application is removal of condition 7, which states that further information should have been provided prior to commencement of the development. Obviously now it's of no consequence, but just out of interest, do we know why that didn't happen and were there any consequences to that?
Ask Kim Allen if she could respond to that, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor McNaughton. You've raised 2 points, as you say, Councillor McNaughton. Firstly, with regards to the increase in number of balconies and the reduction in brise soleil, I would remind you that any development has to be approved through our building regulations standard, and obviously the sort of sustainability elements of the buildings are monitored and awarded. So I feel that point will be picked up through it. In my own mind, I think it will have a neutral impact. But as I say, it's something that building regs would deal with. And then second of all, in terms of condition 7 and the reason that didn't come forward sooner, in my mind, it's something. There have been a number of variations over the past 5 years, with a number of background applications and discharge of conditions. I think that the applicant has always been slightly uncertain in terms of how to address condition 7 and what would be appropriate and achievable to them. And in terms of why it's only come now, again, I don't have a clear answer for you. I can surmise, but they certainly know that they need consent, and by including it in this application, that does provide them with the assessment from planning officers, and B, with it being dealt with through permissions. So it's had the same level of assessment. I hope that's helpful.
Councillor McNaughton, were there any other points you wanted to make? If we could move then on to Councillor Allen, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, I'm obviously I'm a councillor in Shirley West, and as such, I'm very much aware of the feelings of residents in Shirley West regarding this development, and I sympathise with them, I have to say. However, in my role on planning on the planning committee, I am obliged to approach every application with an open mind, and I've not yet decided how I will vote on this until I've heard the rest of the debate. I've got a couple of questions. One is, can you confirm to Kim that this is retrospective application, and that all of the building work has now been complete. And the other thing is on page 27, it says this permission does not, under the conditions, this permission does not authorise the display upon the premises of any advertisement, including any shown on the plans accompanying the application. Separate application for which should be made under the provisions of the Town and Country Planning Control of Advertisement Regulations 2007. There's been a great big hoarding around that building for a very long time, advertising the extra care village. And I just wonder if they have actually made an application under the provisions of the Town and Country Planning Control of Advertisement Regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Kim Allen, could I ask you to comment on that, please?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for your questions, Councillor Allen. The first one is straightforward. This is a retrospective application, so you are absolutely right. I should have made that clear at the start. These building works have already taken place and now in situ on site, so they've happened. Secondly, in terms of the signage around the building, more normally, construction sites are entitled to provide some level of advertisement. I recognise that there is, I've seen it myself, there is larger advertisements, and on that point I'd need a little bit of time just to check the planning history for you, Councillor Allen, so if I may I'll come back to you on that. Okay, I'll have a look now.
Thank you, Kim, that's fine, thank you.
If we could move forward to Councillor Hull Allen, please.
Chairman, actually, some of it's been said already that I was looking for. Have I got this right? We've got people actually resident in this building now, haven't we? Got people living there. Is that right?
I don't know.
I'm sure it was mentioned earlier to me, Chairman. Sorry.
Yes.
I want to be sure of their safety. Otherwise, I just want to pick up the fact that it was said at the beginning. This is a extremely important part of the borough. It is a long time finishing, and I would like to see it take off and do really well now, and I am going to support the recommendation of approval. But I am just a bit concerned as to just how far it's gone. Although I've been round there some weeks back, I haven't been in and out of the building, Kim, so I'm not quite sure when you say it's retrospective what is developed and what isn't. Other than that, if it's all finished now, then I just wanted to be sure that some of the rest. I'm sure, Chair, somebody did say to us recently that there were people actually living in part of this development, but I may have got it wrong. Otherwise, I was supporting the approval.
Thank you. Councillor Grinsell, if you'd like to comment.
Thank you, Chairman. I remember this building not as power gen, but prior to that, the Central Electricity Generating Board. Then it became power gen and was derelict for some 30 years. So whilst there are minor differences now between what was approved and what is actually in situ, I believe in time this will be looked upon as an asset to Shirley, rather than the negative vibes that we've had over a long period of time. And I'm very happy to support this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Grinsell, are there any other members who would like to address the committee? If you would like to, if you put your hands up, please.
Allen.
Does she want to make another comment, Councillor Hull Allen? You'll need to unmute your microphone, Councillor Hull Allen.
I just wanted to Are the people living there now? That's what I need to know. That's what I asked, Chairman. Thank you.
Chairman, may I respond to Councillor Hall-Allen?
Do.
Thank you. Councillor Hall-Allen, the report sets out that many of the units have already been sold, and that is as far as it's got. So it's not actually occupied now. And again, Councillor Chairman, whilst I've got the microphone, please can I share with the members, looking at the planning history for PowerGen, there have been a number of applications relating to advertisements and hoardings in the past. In terms of the particular hoardings that Councillor Allen raises, I'd like to get back to her on that after the meeting. Thank you.
Without wishing to be sounding disrespectful about the advertising, that's not part of our decision-making process this evening, though, and shouldn't interfere with what's in front of us. I think would be the way I'm considering the matter to be.
Correct, Chairman.
Councillor Allen wants to speak again, Chairman.
Councillor Hall-Allen, carry on.
Councillor Maggie Allen.
Beg your pardon, Councillor Maggie Allen.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, what was I going to say?
Advertising hoardings?
No, it wasn't anything to do with advertising hoardings. Yeah, it was just a comment about yes, just to confirm that the housing development, the Lion Court housing development, has been sold. Everybody's in there, but I don't think anybody's in the extra care facility yet. Just wanted to confirm that. In my role as councillor, I'm aware of that.
Thank you. So I do not think, unless I'm corrected by anyone, that there's anyone else wanting to make a further contribution to this discussion. So I would suggest that we now take a vote. Bear with me for a moment. So the recommendation is one of approval, subject to conditions and the variation of the existing 106 agreement. And to enable our votes to be counted, can we show by raising hands all those in favour, and enable and keep your hands raised until your name has been called by Deborah Merry.
Bear with me, Chairman. I'm just recording the votes now.
Thank you.
Okay, so Chairman, I can't actually see your vote. Are you voting?
I am voting yes. My hands in front of my face, yeah.
Okay, and can Councillor Gough, I can't see Councillor Gough's vote. Councillor Gough still in the meeting?
I'm still here and I'm voting.
Okay, and Councillor Ryan? Councillor Ryan still in the meeting?
I
am. I can't see your vote.
No, his hand was raised.
Okay, thank you. So just looking at the voting, Chairman, it looks as if we have 9 members of the committee all voting in favour of the recommendation.
So unanimous decision. Is there any dissent from that? Is there any person who feels that their vote has not been recorded correctly? So I think we can safely say we have a unanimous decision to that item. So we'll move forward now to the next item on the agenda, which is number 2, Kingscote Road in Dorridge. pages 39 to 52 of your papers. And I think this is going to be introduced to us by Lawrence Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. This application in front of members seeks the demolition of the existing house and replacement with 2 5-bedroom dwellings. Before I show members the details, we just need to update the report in terms of a number of matters. The applicant has provided an updated SIL form to reflect the correct floor areas for the existing dwellings and outbuildings to be demolished and then offset. That contribution now has been amended and therefore it needs to be updated within your committee report to a figure of £45,293.15. We have received further 3 objections from local residents who have previously objected to the proposal. These have raised no new material planning considerations. We just need to update you at the report to your members. The amendment to page 46 of the report, the last paragraph, the report states that there are no habitable rooms on the flank elevation to this neighbouring property facing the application. For clarity, the flank wall of number 4 excuse me, contains bathroom windows upstairs which are non-habitable, and at ground floor there is a secondary kitchen window nearest the front of the property and a secondary lounge window towards the rear. We're also suggesting that it is appropriate to include a further condition in relation to matters of protection of all trees, hedges and shrubs on the site during the construction phase. Therefore, we propose an additional condition 15, which reads, prior to the commencement of work on site, all existing trees, hedges, large shrubs, except those for removal, shall be protected by barriers. Details of the type of fencing and its siting shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. Thereafter, the tree barriers shall be implemented and maintained on site as approved. The protected areas shall be kept free of all materials, equipment and building activity during the site development, and the ground levels within the protected areas shall not be raised or lowered. The reason for that condition is to minimise disturbance to vegetation during the development and in accordance with policies P10 and P15 in the local plan. We also propose to add an additional informative to any decision notice if you are minded to approve that requires noise and during construction and dust control and burning material measures to be in accordance with the Environmental and Pollution Act. So, Joe, if I could go to the presentation, please. Just scroll through the slides. The first slide that you'll see is the site and location plan showing the existing house on the site on the corner of Kingscote Road and Grange Road. Next one, please, Joe. This shows, it's not very clear, but the two new properties that will be replace the 2 existing houses on that junction as infill development. Next slide, please. This shows the top part of the plan shows the street scene to the proposal with the 2 houses shown on that elevation with the massing of the existing buildings on the site, and the site layout plan below, which shows the relationship of the plot 1 to number 4 and plot 2 to number 72 Grange Road. Next slide, please, Joe. These are the elevations to plot 1. You'll see it is effectively a 2-storey house with use of the first floor area for additional bedroom accommodation, utilising roof lights within its front elevation. Next slide, Joe, please. This is plot 2, which again is slightly lower than the plot 1 proposal, but again has rooms in its roof space, utilising again roof lights within that elevation, front and rear. The report sets out the material considerations in terms of the application, which are set out in the report, which include whether the development is appropriate residential use within this area with relevant planning policy, the impact that the proposal would have on the character and appearance of the stream and that local distinctiveness, the impact on the amenities of neighbours and their living conditions, the effect of the proposal on highway safety and the free flow of traffic on this corner site, with other materials considerations of landscaping, ecology, drainage, and the update on sill, setting out those matters in detail within the report. The recommendation to members is one of approval, subject to the conditions set out in the report and the additional condition I've just mentioned in terms of tree protection measures. Thank you, members.
There is a speaker this evening. There's an objection from two names I mentioned, Helen Harrison and Doreen Murray, and this is to be read out by Deborah Merry.
Chairman, I have a representation from R.J. Harris and in respect of 65 Solihull Road. It says these comments are being made on behalf of a number of neighbours.
No, I think that's a mistake. I think we're dealing with Kingscote Road, Dorridge.
Oh, beg your pardon, Chairman.
It's Helen Harrison and Doreen Murray.
Yes, Chair, just to clarify.
Ahead of myself.
Sorry, Chair, Deborah, just to clarify, the names, the submission is by Helen Harrison on behalf of her relative Doreen Murray, who's the neighbour.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll start again on the right page. So the submission reads, Dear Planning Committee members, as one of the 9 residents most adversely affected by the proposed development at 2 Kingscote Road, I am grateful for the opportunity to directly address elected members. You will have seen the considerable number of comments from residents in Kingscote Road, Grange Road and Ernsford Close. These are well founded. The planning report concludes that this would be in keeping with the existing houses and not overbearing on adjacent properties. We strongly disagree. The report takes each objection in turn and addresses each to see whether they are compliant with current planning policies. Whilst there may be no technical breaches of each narrow area, cumulatively they add up to a proposed development which is not in keeping with the current residential area and is overbearing on adjacent properties. This would be hugely detrimental to the area and would seriously affect my property. I would like to illustrate this point in regards to my house. Citing plot 1, just 100 centimetres away from my boundary, may meet a minimum standard about distance from neighbouring property. The height of the proposed houses is 0.3 metres above the current house, which is allowed, but the roof shape is different. These 3 elements added together result in a significant loss of light, affecting 2 downstairs rooms, but also the bathroom, where this is the only source of light. Looking out towards this house would be akin to looking onto a 3-storey block of flats, and in fact just a huge brick wall right in front of my eyes. This needs to be mitigated by positioning the house further away from the boundary and inserting a pitched roof. Further, the application of the 45-degree rule may be technically correct as it does not apply to habitable rooms, but the overshadowing of my porch is a 4th minimum element which contributes to further detriment when looking at it holistically. None of these aspects can be appreciated by looking at maps, as it is the combination of so many minimum requirements which add up to a serious impact on my house, and more widely within the neighbourhood. The elevation pictures on the plans are misleading and give an incorrect impression of space around the proposed development. Whilst the report notes that houses are of different heights in Kingscote Road, it is worth noting that from around house 20 to the bottom of the road, there is a natural downward gradient, which gives the appearance of reducing height of houses in a natural and pleasingly aesthetic way. This is important as there is a bungalow opposite at number 3, and standard 2-storey houses. There are no 2.5 or 3-storey houses in the vicinity. The proposed new houses would abruptly raise the height of the houses in an inappropriate way. The harm caused by this development within an urban private residential garden outweighs any benefit of increasing housing supply by 1. I would urge members to consider the effect of the development as a whole on the area and on individual properties, and believe there are strong grounds for refusing this application.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for that. I think I'm correct that there's no speaker in support of the application.
Chairman, you're right.
So on that basis, I will move the motion. It's my responsibility to start the debate. The Council's standing orders require me to move the motion. Although I am moving the motion, I am still undecided on how I will vote. Do I have a second?
Chairman.
Councillor Grinsell, thank you very much. So, who would like to talk on this matter? Councillor Cole? Oh, 1 second.
Councillor Hull Allen.
Hull Allen. Any other hands up at the moment? No. I'm looking for the pictures are sort of so I can only see Councillor Cole and Councillor Hull Allen at the moment. So Councillor Cole, if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 48 of the report, and it mentions about drainage on this page. There's obviously concerns raised by the drainage engineer. And further to that, on page 51, there's further on items B and C, further problems with drainage there. We need to make sure that drainage of this site is well maintained, and there are obviously concerns there. So can we check on when it's going ahead, or if it goes ahead, that drainage of the site is one of the main concerns on that? Thank you, Chair.
I'm not sure what the main thrust of your question is with regard to drainage. Are you suggesting that drainage should be dealt with in a more comprehensive fashion before planning?
Yes, Chair, I'll come back to you on that. Obviously, the drainage engineer has raised a point on that, saying that the soils are impermeable, and we need to make sure that if building goes ahead, that one of the conditions on this is that a way of getting the water away from the surfaces is looked at and controlled. And as I say, it does say on page 51 there should be a drainage strategy should be there and demonstrate that the surface water runoff must not exceed the development site. Good officers confirm that that will be one of the things that they'll be looking at when or if building goes ahead on this. Thank you. I hope I've made myself clear there.
Thank you, Hap. So Mr. Osborne, if you could respond to the drainage point. Should we have a drainage strategy agreed before we grant planning permission, I think is the question.
Chairman, thank you for that, and thank you for the question from Councillor Cole. It's not necessary to have a condition or to have the drainage details up front in terms of the matter. What the condition allows for and will be required to be signed off by your drainage engineers is the full details of how this site will be drained for the development, so it meets not only their technical requirement but building regulations going forward. So the condition requires them to submit the precise details first for them to check. We will not discharge that condition unless it meets the necessary standards, and it will ensure that the site is drained appropriately. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Holt.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Cole. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Hull Allen.
Thank you, Chair, and I would support what Councillor Cole has just said, because it does mention the concerns about drainage. But if that's all going to be sorted, then I agree it's good. Chairman, I live fairly near this property, but not near enough to have to declare an interest, and I don't know the owners, but I have been round. And I do understand how a lot of people in the road are probably upset about it being developed. At the moment, there's a very large property there anyway. And I don't mention the word anyways, because if you move a little bit further down onto Grange Road, there are 2 or 3 areas there having exactly the same sort of thing happening, being either rebuilt or made smaller, and 2 in one site. There are a lot of large properties in the area, and it is sometimes difficult to stop. But I have to say, I think on page 43 at the top, it mentions the sort of justification of having a property built in this area. It's not exactly back to the railway station, but it has got a bus stop at the end of the road, and of course it's got a little village not far away with shops, and we've got schools and a surgery. I can't think of any real reason why this development could be stopped, and I would therefore be supporting approval of this, the recommendation as promised. Thank you, Chairman.
Grinsell.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to ask Mr. Osborne a minor question. Obviously, our pack says that we have 9 responses of rejection. He suggested that there were 3 more, but did he also suggest that those 3 were already part of the 9? I'm just trying to be clear and have clarification on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Osborne, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the update note or the update, a proverbial update I provided you with is that 3 more representations were received. Those additional 3 representations were from those people who'd already made representations. So they came from one of those 9 people who'd already made representations.
Thank you for that, Mr. Osborne.
I would like to make a comment. I don't know what members of the committee feel about this application in particular, but what strikes me is that we live in different times, and of course we've not seen this site. We haven't visited site as we normally would do, and I think we should bear in mind carefully the fact that we are handicapped in not having visited the site. For those members who've not attended, are not familiar with the particular location. My own view was, when I looked at the plans, I thought, and it's a point that's made by the speaker, by the objector, how close it is to their property. They say 1 metre separation, and they use the word cramming. And for my own part, I thought the site did look crammed on the plan. So I am undecided on how I will vote about this matter. And I would like some comment from Mr. Osborne as to the relative density of this matter in comparison to the overall street scene.
Chairman, just to advise members, there is a 1 metre gap proposed between the side flank wall of plot 1 to the side boundary with number 4, Kingscote Road. The gap between the 2 properties will be 2.82 metres between the 2, so it's quite a substantial gap. And those in that area, the gaps between properties are similar to that sort of distance. So I wouldn't suggest that it's over development of the plot. It's in line with your guidance. It follows quite a few of the developments that have taken place along that area of Dorridge previously, and it respects that local distinctiveness that has taken place and the changes that have taken place in Dorridge in that area. I hope that assists you, Chairman.
It does assist me, but I think I am remaining concerned that of only the 1 metre gap between plot 4 and one of the properties. That to me did seem quite a shallow gap, and it's a substantial reduction from the gap that previously existed. And the papers do refer to us to right to respect for family and private life at page 49 of the pack of papers. So it's a balancing exercise between the rights of the applicant and the rights of the neighbour. And I'm just troubled by that at this stage. And I'm just interested to know whether any members of the committee have share any similar concerns, or whether if I'm in a minority, so be it.
Councillor Alan, Chairman.
Alan?
Can I come back?
Please do. Yes, please do comment, Councillor Holland.
I sympathise with what you're saying, but I have to say that there are properties very, very similar with only about, well, old England, old sort of way of looking at things, a metre, 3 foot or less apart from a property next door. There are several examples of properties like that, very near to where this is going to be developed, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor McNaughton, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor McNaughton.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree with what the chairman said. The way where I would disagree with what Councillor Allen said is that this is an existing situation that's being made worse in a way by what's proposed. What I'm struggling to see is how it could not be permitted on those grounds. Having read the paper, you know, I don't think there's. I think it's very borderline. The argument made by the chairman about right to private life, that's valid, I think, and I think I can sympathise with the people objecting. Overall, the applications sound other than that one thing, I think, but that does still concern me, and I would concur with that. Yeah.
Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to advise yourself and the committee chairman, I did drive round the application site coming back from work over the weekend. And it struck me that the site is very cramped for 2 5-bedroom houses detached. I do believe it'll have if it were to go ahead, it will have quite a detrimental effect on the properties that will be adjacent, both to the rear of this site and to the side of this site. So I have great sympathy with the people who are objecting, and I can understand it from what I saw when I drove around the site over the weekend. I couldn't imagine that one can get 2 5-bedroom houses onto that particular site. It's a prominent corner, and the traffic movements that will take place, both entering the houses and leaving them. So that concerned me, Chairman. And I don't think it fits in with the local plan, our local plan policy P5. And I don't think it fits in with the national policy framework of section 12 of that national policy framework. So I do believe that there is possibly grounds for refusal of the application as it is proposed. And that's where I stand on the matter, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Goff, Chairman.
If anyone wants to speak.
Councillor Goff and Councillor Cole, Chairman.
Councillor Goff, thank you very much, Councillor Greensill. So Councillor Goff and then Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like a little bit of clarification. I think I know the answer, but my understanding is it's a metre to the boundary, not a metre between properties. Am I correct in assuming that, Mr. Lawrence?
That is correct, Chairman.
Thank you for that.
Solihull.
Thank you, David.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, David.
Oh, thank you. I must concur with the chairman. It's really difficult making decisions on this, not having been to site and had a look round. I don't know the area. I really do feel handicapped on this one. However, we've got to make a decision on it. And it's a difficult one. It really is a difficult one. And I would, because it's so difficult, I'm going to urge on caution and say I'm not happy with this. Thank you.
So I think, unless there's any other one,
Grinsell, please.
Councillor Grinsell, please carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. In light of comments, whilst I didn't take the opportunity of being able to drive around because of isolation, I did view it on Google Maps. Would there be a case for perhaps deferral of this until such time as we can view it in situ?
I think that's a perfectly understandable suggestion. I think I'd have to be guided by officers' advice on this matter, and I might have to speak to officers separately about that. I'm concerned that we may fall foul of our legal obligations for not determining a decision in a sufficiently appropriate time frame. Are you suggesting we defer it to the next meeting, or we defer it until what point?
If you're asking me the question, Chairman, obviously we don't know when this lockdown is likely to happen. Under the current rules, we are allowed to drive to work. Now, perhaps if we were to defer it until the next meeting, we could all take the opportunity of driving effectively to work to view this in situ so that we can make a more informed decision. Does that assist you, Chairman?
Thank you. It's a sensible suggestion. Can I ask members of the committee what their view on that is, whether or not there is an appetite for a deferral to enable individual site visits to take place? Maybe if I could suggest we show by our hands. Councillor Cole, you've got your hand raised. Does that suggest to me that you're in favour of that proposition?
Yes, Chair, I'd like to agree with Councillor Grinsell that we do that.
Councillor Hall Allen.
Well, you can go with it, but I'm not flat out. Over 70's got to stay put. But I do know the site. But I have to say, Chair, I do respect what members have just said. If you haven't seen where it is, and yes, it would be tight, and yes, they are two large properties. But I'm only going by what I know of this area and the properties that are already going to go up soon, and the properties that are already here. So I actually don't think we have strong planning reasons to stop it, Chair. Thank you.
You're happy to support a deferral if necessary.
Chair.
Yes, Chairman. This week.
Mr. Upton, yes.
Can I just pick up on members' concerns, and I'm just thinking about the best option to move that forward given the current circumstances. Would it be helpful that we have some further sort of material to add to the presentation for next time in terms of a current photographic record of the site and its surroundings? That would help hopefully allay some of the concerns that members may have around the site and the surroundings. That's just a suggestion, Chair, and perhaps defer on that basis.
I think that sounds sensible. Are you not advising members to take individual trips then? Are you suggesting that they should confine themselves to the paper presentation that will be supplemented, or are you suggesting that members are well entitled to take a detour to work to look at it?
That may be the case, that they may wish to do the visit. I'm just trying to think about an alternative that means that there isn't a requirement to do that. And I think if we can get a comprehensive photographic record of the site and surroundings, that may assist members in their concerns that have been raised this evening.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Councillor Holland, your hands in the air.
Yes, thank you so much. This is our first meeting, and I think a lot of concern is coming up as to how we deal with planning matters. And there's nothing more true than we make up our minds when we are actually in the meeting, which we are trying to do now without actually the majority of us having seen what we're talking about. I just wonder if there's a way we can still have in future, Chairman, the bus, possibly a bigger one, so we can space and so on and so forth. And then on the usual way, before a meeting, we go round the sites, because otherwise we're maybe coming up again. We're being sensitive in lots of ways, and I think it's a bit difficult. I have to say, I'm just putting that out, Kim and officers, because that's something maybe being discussed obviously after this meeting. But it's just a thought, and I had thought about it before I got here, because I thought, well, you know, it is hard when we haven't seen the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Grinsell.
I think that is something that has to be discussed privately and not in this forum.
I think yes. I think it's a helpful suggestion to make, but I don't think it's something really that advances this agenda item, does it? I think we need to make a decision about what's before us. It's a fair comment to say, isn't it, that we are not fully appraised of the situation as we normally would be. We would normally be looking at this site, seeing it three-dimensionally, if that's the right phrase, you know, being there rather than, you know, the sort of limited experience that we've got. So I think I'm very sensitive to that. I think it's a very important point. Councillor Gough.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, you know, I'm looking at the plan, and you know, someone that's you know, used to looking at plans, you know, on the, you know, the side where number 4 is, there's actually 2.8 meters between properties, and that's a reasonable amount of space in this day and age. And on the other side, there's considerably more space. So I don't think there's a reasonable reason to actually refuse the application or even defer it. Thank you, Chair.
Put the hand up, Chair.
Yes, I'm just pausing for a moment because I just wanted to come back on Councillor Gough's point. You say the gap between number 4 and the property is 2.8 metres. I don't think that's the case. I think the 2.8 metres is between the two properties, but the gap between number 4 and the new property is less than that. Can I have the measurements on the gap between number 4 and the first property?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Gough is quite correct. The gap between number 4 and the side elevation to plot 1 is 2.82 metres. The gap between the dwellings themselves, plots 1 and plot 2, is 1.28. And then you've got a 1 metre gap to the side boundary to number 70, but you've got that single-storey garage along that elevation. So in terms of planning policy and your spatial relationships, it's in full accordance with all your guidance. Thank you.
I'm surprised at that, because looking at the plan, the gap between the houses looks larger than the gap between number 4, just as a matter of common sense. So can that be checked with a ruler now, please?
Certainly, Jeff. Joe, could you put the presentation back up again for me so I can just be clear? And if you go back 2 or 3 slides to the next, that one, that there, that, go back again, that side. So if Joe, if you could take the pointer to the top part of the street scene at the top part of the site. So up to the top left, where you can see that there's an outline of a house there, and then the proposal. Yeah, that's correct. The gap between the side flank wall there, Chairman, and plot number 1 there, which is there, that gap there is 2.82 metres. Then the gap between the 2 properties themselves that are proposed is 1.28 metres between the eaves. And then the gap to the side boundary on the right-hand side of the property, which shown in outline, is 1 metre along that boundary. So in terms of your spatial relationship and your guidelines that are adopted, it seeks 1 metre gaps between properties as a minimum. In spacious settings can be up to 2 or more metres. The gaps that are proposed on this site are in line with what the character and local distinctiveness of that area is. I can't advise you any further on that matter. That it's a matter of planning judgment to whether you think those gaps are appropriate, but in my mind, they are appropriate.
It's very helpful. Thank you very much. And Councillor Goff, I appreciate your intervention there, because I think it's certainly disabused me of a misapprehension I had about that. So thank you for that. Councillor McNaughton.
Thank you. Just in response to that, I can see that the gap between the buildings as proposed in the plan is acceptable in planning terms. I think I go back to the point that it's a changing to an existing circumstance, particularly in relation to the light issue raised by the residents who put the objection in. There are a number of windows on the side of that house, and it's not simply a matter of the distance between the 2 houses, but the proposed new replacement dwelling also goes much further back alongside number 4. If you combine those things together, there will inevitably be a significant reduction in light, and I think that's perhaps their main concern. So, excuse me, it's not just the distance between them. I think it's the fact that light from this, general light from different directions will also be blocked out by the increased depth of the new property.
Back, Chairman, on the matter, just to answer Mr. McNaughton's question.
Yeah, please do. I think the point Councillor McNaughton's making is that whereas we normally look at properties in terms of the depth in the garden, this is significant because it's 2 stories, obviously, and he thinks it's an infringement on the light. So if you could comment on the light issue.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, clearly it is a material planning consideration which you've got to have bear in mind. Well, when I introduced the item, I did advise you that at that side elevation to number 4 contains a bathroom window on the upstairs, which is effectively non-habitable. On the ground floor, there are 2 secondary windows. One is a secondary window to a kitchen, so it's got a primary window to the front and to the back, and also a secondary lounge window. So there are primary light sources front and rear on number 4, and then there are 2 secondary lights, secondary windows at ground floor, which in planning terms receive less protection because they're not the primary light source into that rooms. They are the secondary light sources. Clearly there is an impact, but the question you have to ask yourself as members is whether that is unreasonable or not. Our view as officers is they does have an impact on the secondary light sources, but it's not unreasonable because the primary light sources on into those rooms is not affected.
Thank you. The other speakers. Don't see any other speakers. So I think we need to decide whether or not there's an appetite for a deferral, as suggested by Councillor Grinsell. Are you proposing that, Councillor Grinsell, as a proposal to defer, or was it thinking out loud that you're not quite decided on at this stage?
I wasn't decided on it, Chairman. I want to see other people's views based on what Councillor Goff and Mr. Osborne have just put forward. I'm not prepared to propose a deferral.
So you're not proposing a deferral?
I'm not.
No, excellent. Okay, so I don't think that anyone else presumably is proposing a deferral. If you are, you need to declare it now. I would therefore suggest that on that basis, we look at going to a vote. I'm just looking at a note that I've been passed by Councillor, by Kim Allen, who was just advising me about the deferral issue. It's not something I need to concern ourselves with now because that doesn't have any legs. There's no appetite for the deferral. So the proposal before us is approval subject to conditions. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand. Councillor Grinsell, Councillor Cole, I see with that name, hands raised. Councillor Slater, hand raised. Councillor Ryan, hand lowered. Councillor McNaughton, hand lowered. Councillor Hull Allen, in favour. Off favour. So would Debbie, you'd like to count those votes for us?
You've forgotten mine.
I don't seem to have Councillor Allen's vote. Councillor Allen?
I'm not approving.
Okay, and Councillor Holt, I didn't see your vote. Chairman?
I'm not voting in favour.
Okay, so the people I have noted as voting in favour: Councillor Cole, Councillor Goff, Councillor Grinsell, Councillor Hull Allen, Councillor Slater. Have I missed anybody?
And although, and I suppose we will say all those against to please show.
Councillor Allen, you're voting against. Councillor Holt, I don't see your vote.
I'm voting against.
Okay. And Councillor Ryan, is that a vote against?
It is, I think.
So just to make sure I've got this right, because I'm not sure I'm seeing everybody. The people I've got listed as voting in favour: Councillor Cole, Councillor Goff, Councillor Grinsell, Councillor Hull Allen, Councillor McNaughton, Councillor Slater. Is that correct?
I didn't vote in favour.
Councillor McNaughton, you did not vote in favour. Okay, thank you. And the voting against: Councillor Allen, Councillor Holt, Councillor McNaughton, Councillor Ryan.
Against either.
Councillor McNaughton, you abstained. Okay. So in favour we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Against we have 1, 2, 3, and abstain we have 1. So that is carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So if we go on to the next item then, which is at Solihull Road, pages 61 to 88 of your pack. Mr. Osborne, if you'd like to introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for a replacement dwelling on this site. It was deferred at your last meeting on the 26th of February, so officer could clarify issues around land ownership and seek further information from the enforcement section relating to the progression of events that led to the submission of the application. you'll see that the report sets out on page 61 that the applicant has reiterated that all land on which the proposed works have and will take place is under their ownership. On page 62 of your report, it sets out the planning history to the site in terms of those applications that have been submitted in 2019, which were for extensions, and the most recent extension granted in November 2019. And then the current submission of the replacement dwelling that followed an enforcement issue that was raised and investigated by your officers, and the applicant advised at that stage there was a number of large voids under the existing house that meant that a new fresh application was proposed, and the development has subsequently ceased until consideration of this application. Report goes on to state that your officers have worked progressively to agree amendments with the applicant in terms of removing a first floor rear balcony and reducing the rear patio. Report on page 63 sets out the main changes to the site. So, Joe, could you call up the presentation, please? Just scroll through. So that is the site plan of the proposal, shows the house on its plot and its relationship to neighbours. This is the proposal that shows that the proposed replacement dwelling on the site and its various elevations and floor plans. Next slide. And this is one of the important one that shows what effectively outlined in red is the fallback position, which shows the extensions that have already been granted planning permission on the house, and the changes that the proposed scheme intends to do. So you can see in terms of the additional first floor element along the side boundary, the projection of the garage to the front, and the slight increase in the rear projection of the single story element, and the alterations to the roof detailing of the house. The next slide, please, Joe. And that shows what was granted planning permission. So you can see that the fenestration detail, etc., has not changed from what the fallback position is. It's just the roofscape and the extensions that have changed in terms of the planning permission now being sought. Report sets out in detail the material considerations in terms of what is the fallback position, and clearly you need to have regard to what permissions have already had been granted, and those changes that are proposed in terms of what impact they have on the character and appearance of the area and the impact on the amenities of neighbours. And the recommendation is one of approval. Thank you, Chairman.
So we do have a speaker tonight, an objector, and we also have a supporter. So if we could hear from the objector, Mr. R.J. Harris, and Deborah Merry is going to read out the comments made.
Okay, Chairman, this begins. These comments are being made on behalf of a number of neighbours adjacent to or facing the development at number 65 Solihull Road. We note no changes have been made, as published on the planning website, to the design or detail of proposals submitted to and discussed at the planning meeting held on the 26th of February 2020 and set in the documents submitted to that meeting by the planning officers. A number of concerns were raised at that meeting, which therefore remain. They are: 1. The neighbours at number 67, Mr and Mrs Evans, are particularly concerned that the proximity of sections of the breeze block garage wall constructed adjacent to them are so close as to preclude any cladding being applied or future maintenance being possible to either wall. 2. That the development as proposed will have an overbearing impact. Planning officers have acknowledged the most recent proposal increases the height of the eaves, and that adding a first floor element adjacent to number 67, as well as increasing other sections of the roof, in inverts, will increase the bulk and mass of the house, close inverts. In addition, we have concerns that the building should not be significantly higher than adjacent properties, a concern which arises from the fact that as constructed, the ground floor ceiling heights are around 10 feet high. 3, that the design of and materials used in the front elevation should ensure the new building is in keeping with the style and character of the existing street scene.
Thank you very much. So that is the comments from the objector, R.J. Harris. There is a statement, I think, from Dr. Ramesh Sadisvan. I think you're going to read out.
Yes, Chairman. Dr. Ramesh Sadisvan says, I would like to thank members for giving us the opportunity of addressing committee this evening in respect of this application. I want to thank the Planning Department who helped with redesign the proposal, taking into account the concerns and submitted objections. I would like to reassure everyone that we will continue to listen to all concerns and try our utmost to address them. We watched the previous committee meeting online and were disappointed to note that misleading comments made by an objector led members to believe that we had encroached onto adjacent land and shown little regard for our immediate neighbours and the planning system. I wish to assure all members respectfully that this is not the case. Firstly, I attach a plan showing our title deed with the proposed development overlaid, which clearly demonstrates that there has been no encroachment onto either neighbour's property. The proposed dwelling sits comfortably within the red line which denotes our ownership, number 65. Secondly, I would like to assure members that we have total respect for our neighbours' well-being and private amenity, together with the planning process, rules and regulations. We are guilty, however, of following some very bad advice, which is partly why we find ourselves in the current situation. When we initially purchased number 65, it was our intention to demolish the property in order to rebuild a family home for my wife, myself and young son. We were advised that if we demolished, we would be required to pay large amounts of SIL, which would have had serious financial implications on the project, so proceeded along the lines of a series of extensions which were approved by your officers. As we demolished much of the structure, such as main supporting walls, etc., were found to be in poor condition and were unsuitable to support the approved extensions, which unfortunately led to a protracted and messy build programme, which we appreciate may have caused some inconvenience to our immediate neighbours. I would point out that throughout the process we actively engaged with both neighbours to try to ensure that they were kept informed and not overly inconvenienced during the build itself. After taking advice from an alternative consultant, we concluded that the new build replacement dwelling approach would have been simpler, far quicker and less costly, hence the submission of the application before you this evening. I would advise members that during the life of the current application, we have worked positively with your officers and, in accordance with their recommendations, have removed the balconies from our proposal and made the suggested amendments to the plans in order to protect the amenity of the immediate neighbours. It is our aim to be fully compliant with your authority's space about dwellings standards, and as the application is recommended for approval, it is my understanding that we are. We understand that some local residents have expressed concerns regarding the modern design, suggesting that it is out of keeping with the street scene. The issue of design is very subjective, and we respect and appreciate that people may have differing views. It was our intention to respect the roofscape, general form and massing of the typical Solihull vernacular generally found within the street scene, but with a more modern fenestration and the use of modern materials. Many similar modern interpretations of traditional dwellings have been approved by officers and this committee throughout the borough, and we understand from the officers' report that the current elevational design is considered by officers to be acceptable. We are of course flexible on the external materials, and should members be minded to approve the application, we would work with officers to come up with a palette of materials which would be harmonious and respectful to the surrounding houses. Members will be aware that during the build we have constructed an ancillary building, a gym, within the rear garden of the property, which we were advised complied fully with the national guidelines of permitted development.
But I should interrupt you at that point because generally we only permit 3 minutes time from the applicant. Is there much more to go on the paperwork that you have in front of you?
4 short paragraphs, Chairman. Would you like me to continue?
I think if you could try and just perhaps go to the conclusion, because I think you've exceeded now your 3 minute period. So if you could try and conclude.
Okay, so in summary, we regret that we followed incorrect advice, but did so in good faith, sincerely believing we were fully compliant. The project has unfortunately placed on hold as a result of the current application and, of course, the unprecedented COVID-19 situation, which has deeply affected us all. We would very much like to resume work on site as soon as it is surely in everyone's interest that the current building site is transformed to a family home once again. I would respectfully urge members to endorse the officer's recommendation before you this evening and would take this opportunity to assure you that we will do everything we can to complete the work swiftly and will maintain and respect the privacy and amenity of our neighbours whilst doing so. Thank you for your time.
I'm just struggling to find some papers. Bear with me for a moment. I'm looking for my moving the motion speech comments. I can't find them. So, Vice Chairman, I don't know whether you've got yours to hand. You'd like to move it in my absence?
Regrettably, no, I've not had a copy.
Okay.
And if you have access to email, I can send it to you.
I've read them out all evening, so that it'll be on my desk. My desk has only got these papers, so.
If I can help, Chair, it's perhaps at the foot of your introduction.
No, it doesn't help because it's on a separate piece of paper.
Can you email me and I'll read them out?
I've misplaced it. It's just gone missing. If you'd like to email it.
Can't we repeat it, guys?
Sorry?
Can't we put it together for you? My duty.
I'd like it, if you'd like to email it to my email address or Councillor Grinson, whoever gets it first can read it out. I'm sure I could try and guess it, but I don't want to.
Emailing it now, Chairman.
You're emailing it now?
Yes.
Unfortunately, the connection error on the on our emails, I think.
Connection on your email. Would you like me to read it for you, Chairman?
If you read it to me, I will write it down.
Okay. Would you like me to give you a quick call, Chairman?
Yes, please. Found it. I found it. Fallen off my desk, I'm afraid. Right. I do apologise to everyone. It's my responsibility to start the debate. The Council's standing orders require me to move the motion. Although I am moving the motion, I am still undecided on how I will vote. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Chairman.
Councillor Grinsell, thank you very much indeed. Who would like to comment on this? Councillor Gough, if you'd like to start.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I initially had some major concerns about this, which I raised at the last meeting. But you know, there's a couple of things. One of the major issues was about the balcony, and I see that has now been removed from the application. You know, I see that the applicant has worked quite hard with officers to, you know, to come up with some compromises, and I'm really glad to see that those compromises have been made. This has been a building site for a long time now, and I feel it's important that it progresses from being a building site and actually does become a dwelling at some point in the very near future. So, you know, based on that, I will be approving the application, or voting to approve the application, should I say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. I've noted Councillor Ryan would like to speak, and then Councillor Paul Allen. So Ryan, if you'd like to start.
Unmute, Jim.
Sorry? Yeah.
Okay, now. No, you're on mute again. That's it.
That's it. Thank you. Chairman, I respect that land ownership is not a material planning consideration, and I respect that. Chairman, there are some worrying aspects about this particular application. We will see from our papers on page 62 that there was an application in 2019 for extensions, and that was approved under delegated powers on the 7th of June. That was followed by another application, again for extension, again in 2019, and was approved on the 15th of November. The current planning application was submitted on the 20th of December 2019. And that's the one now we are asked to approve or not. Then there was a concern from a local resident, and indeed a visit was undertaken by the officer on the 13th of January. Again, a further visit on the 10th of February, and there was a meeting with the applicant, and they said there was large voids found. They have partly implemented what we're being asked to approve. Again, on my journey home from work, I did come down and visit the site from the road, and this may well be considered as a retrospective application. The block work is up to, in certain places, first floor level. So this particular work has advanced on an extension application. And now to then talk on this particular application of total demolition. The demolition has taken place except for a chimney breast on the right-hand side. So I think the whole situation has been very cavalier in the extreme. We also see in the report there was a building of a shed in the garden, which the officer said does not meet the standards and will require a planning application. That planning application is with the department at the present time. Saying all of that, Chairman, I am concerned about it. I'm concerned about it in the road scene and the street scene. I'm concerned about the bulk and massing of what I saw over the weekend. But I'd be interested as to what other members feel and think about it from the report that's been presented in front of us. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Osborne, could you respond with any comments that you think are relevant there, please?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of design, in terms of the presentation I showed you that the design of the house has not changed from what the extensions have. So in street scene terms, in my view, it's not materially different. What you're looking at is some minor, some changes, additional bulk to from the first floor extension, the height has not increased. So in design terms, it's no different to what they've got planning permission for as an extension. Clearly, there are voids, and there is a construction issue which they've raised and stopped work. In my view, the whole scheme relies on the fallback position of whether the changes they're proposing cause any material harm to the character and appearance of the area or amenity to the neighbours. Your officers have come to the conclusion that they don't, because they're not such significance to cause that impact.
Councillor Hull-Allen.
Very much, Chairman. On this site, we do know, as it happens, most of us have visited it before the lockdown. And on page 8, it shows you very clearly of the minutes of our last meeting that this item was deferred for a further report to outline whether the building is being built in accordance with agreed plans and not causing undue impact upon the neighbour at number 67, and clarification as to matters that would be of a civil nature as opposed to planning. Now, I have some sympathy with Dr. Ramesh. I thought his concerns were very sincere. The area that I'm concerned about, I mean, actually, Councillor Goff mentioned, I think, the back, didn't he? That we know that's going anyway. So they have tweaked it a little bit, I would say. But I'm still concerned, and it followed on a little bit from what we've just been looking at, is that it's going to be still a big property in this modern design. And I think Mr. Osborne is right. We've got quite a few of what I call the modern look coming in very large properties, frankly, all over the borough. But I'm not going to point out where in particular, but I can visualise them without any trouble. So I don't have a problem with the actual design, but I do have a problem with the bulk and the size of impact on number 67. I think, Mr. Osborne, you better point it out to me, and that would help me make my decision. The gap between the proposed building and, in fact, the neighbour, just how far is that? I might help me a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. If Joe, could you go back to the PowerPoint for me?
Very much, Lawrence.
And go back one slide. So what you're seeing there, members, on your screens is what effectively is what has planning permission in terms of the build or the extensions that were granted consent in 2019. And you can see those which are outlined in red. So in terms of its footprint of the building, you can see that the majority of the footprint stays the same as what has had planning permission. The main differences are to the shape of the roof, the first floor extension, and you can see that the garage has been brought forward slightly further forward, and a slight change to the rear single story extension to the rear. So there's only minor changes, but in terms of its relationship with neighbours, councillors, the building sits on the footprint effectively of what has had planning permission. There's some very minor changes, increasing floor areas, which are set out in your report, in terms of increasing the projection of the garage and increasing the projection of the rear extension, but the rest of the footprint of the proposal remains as per the planning permission. The main change is to the roofscape and the additional first floor area, which creates the additional bulk that you are considering. But in terms of its footprint and its relationship to the boundary, that has not changed from the permissions that have been granted for the extensions on the site. I hope that is assistance.
I think Councillor Holland made a about separation of the buildings, did you deal with that?
The point in terms of separation, it sits the same as what the extensions had, so it sits on the footprint of the existing building, so the relationship has not changed. So the separation distances don't change because there's only some minor tweaks to the garage and the rear extension to the rear. The rest of the building, as per the stamp planning permission, sits on the footprint that's already been granted planning permission.
Is that helpful, Councillor Holland? You're on mute.
And yes, it does help me. Thank you.
Okay, super. Are there any other speakers who would like to address the committee?
I'd like to speak again, Chairman, please.
Yeah, Councillor Goff and Councillor Grinsell.
Yeah, it's just a point of clarification from Mr. Osborne. If we were to refuse the application and the applicant was to go ahead with what has already been approved, would I be right in saying where there's a little slight differentiation between the footprint, i.e. the single floor extension and the garage, that could be increased later under permitted development? Would that be correct?
Thank you, Chairman. It could technically be done, but there isn't a lot of space for anything to be done under permitted development, Councillor Goff. So there isn't as a replacement dwelling. He's not going to be able to do very much to the side of the one neighbour at number. I'm trying to get my numbers right. 67, which was the concern that was raised at your last committee.
My point was in refusing this application, if we were mindful to do so, the applicant could probably do it anyway. Is that correct?
He can do the majority of the works, yes, because it's only those changes that he's proposing to do now, which is to extend the garage forward by 800 millimetres, extend the rear extension by I'll check the distances again for you. They're set out in the report. They're all set out in the report on page 63. But they're the only changes they seek. The majority of the building will remain the same. It's only the majority. The main change is the first floor element along the boundary with number 67, which where the additional bulk you are considering, to whether that has really any greater effect on the character and appearance of the street and its relationship with a neighbour.
Thank you.
Chairman, may I just to what Mr. Osborne said, please?
Please, yeah, carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. Joe, can you put the PowerPoint back up, please? On the Appendix A. Thank you. Members, just Lawrence has been absolutely right in what he said insofar as the extensions proposed sit within the floor plate of the house and its approval. But in the middle of your screen of that slide, at the bottom it shows the first floor plan. And to remind you, as Lawrence has explained, the red shows what they've already got consent for, and the grey shows what they're seeking now. And can you see at first floor in the middle, on the right-hand side, there's a slither, and that is actually new as per this application. And on the elevation on the top left-hand side, can you see that new window at the front, which is just beyond the red? Now that element is new. And in terms of how that sits, this, again, going back to the floor plans, you'll see that there's a red slanted line, and that is the boundary between the two houses. So the houses don't have parallel lines between them. In this particular case, it's a slant. There is much more of a gap at the front of the properties to its neighbour. That's about 1.89 metres. But because it's chamfered and it slides in, it gets tighter towards the rear. So just wanted you to be aware and to clarify that that is one of the changes that's proposed. And again, in your report, that's outlined on page, I'm looking at page 77. It's the first bullet point. The first floor side element has been added adjacent to number 67, Solihull Hall Road. So just wanted to be clear on that point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Grinsell, were you to speak next?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In all honesty, I think both Kim Allen and Lawrence Osborne have been very succinct and very clear, and in what we have before us. I don't, and I think Councillor Goff also expressed the view that if we do not approve these, it could go back to the fallback position, which could be worse still. And I'm sorry, but I think whether or not it's this format that's making us all a bit concerned, but I think the officers have been totally accurate, totally upfront, and I'm going to support it. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Anyone else want to comment? Councillor
Ryan.
Councillor Ryan, your hand was in the air. Carry on.
Chairman, it's what is an extension? I always was of the view that an extension was an extension to an existing property. I never believed that an extension would be internal to the existing property, and you can knock down walls and knock down the house to create an extension. Doesn't make sense to me. Maybe someone can advise me differently on it. They have permission for extensions. What I saw over the weekend was a rebuild. The existing house that was there is being demolished, and the only thing that's standing, like I said before, was the chimney breast on the right hand side. And if voids were found, then why wasn't the planning officers involved at that stage? That we have found these voids, we have to take the house down to fill in those voids. We do know their depth, we do not know their width. The officer hasn't indicated that they have seen the voids to make any judgment on them as to their extent. So there are a lot of unanswered questions here with this particular application. I'm not going to rush to support the application just because it needs to be finished. The application needs to be right, and the journey of the application needs to be right. But it doesn't stand up to scrutiny as far as my taking of the application. There are a lot of unanswered questions regarding it. So I think the whole thing has been very cavalier. And if it wasn't for a resident ringing up, there may well have been no site inspection at all. And we wouldn't be in the position we are in now. The job would have just gone ahead and the new rebuild would have taken place. So, Chairman, I know this more than likely this application will go through, but purely as it stands, I will not be able to support the application. I'm probably in a minority of one, but that's where I stand on it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. I see Councillor Allen's hand, and I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Allen. There's one question I wanted to ask, and it was mentioned by the applicant himself in his statement to the committee that he'd been advised by professionals that it wasn't a good idea to demolish it because he would have to pay a SIL contribution. Is there any suggestion that that's why we've got the situation that we have here? That, you know, what we've got is an attempt to get around the SIL payment potentially.
If I could answer that, I think the applicant was misguided by his agent, because in terms of the SIL payment, you would deduct the floor areas of the existing house from any new floor areas you created. There may have been a small charge to him, but it would not have been to the extent that it was a new dwelling in terms of its whole footprint. He would have been able to deduct the floor area from the original house from that SIL payment. So I think the applicant was being correct with you. He was misguided on that matter.
That's very helpful, thank you. In fairness, I think the applicant made the comment himself, so I thought, you know, it was a comment he'd made freely. The application, some comments have been made about the timing of the application, and when I looked at the papers, it struck me that the application for the current planning application had been submitted in December of 2019, and to my mind, I thought that had been submitted quite promptly on the basis that there already was an application. It would appear that they'd reached difficulties with regard to these voids, and that's what caused then the application to come before the committee. So I didn't see a delay. I thought it had been made relatively promptly. I don't know whether I'm misinterpreting the chronology. Perhaps I could be asked for some sort of comment from Mr. Osborne about that.
You're fully correct, Chairman. I think if Joe could put the PowerPoint presentation back up, and I think we got some photographs when we inspected the site that shows the voids that they unearthed when they were. Still keep scrolling through, Joe. Should be the next one. Go. There, you can see that when they started to do the works, they found the voids underneath the house, and they effectively come to the conclusion it was easier in construction and cost terms to do it as a replacement dwelling. Just wanted to pick up a point that Councillor Ryan made about whether it was an extension or whether it's a rebuild. In planning terms, there's been plenty of developments in the borough that's just retained one internal wall within a house, and that has been classed as an extension. So if he has retained just even the one side wall with the chimney breast, it's still classed as an extension. So he still has his valid planning permission to implement, which clearly is his fallback position. I hope that clarifies some of the matters, that shows the voids, etc. Thank you, Chairman.
Alan.
Thank you, Chairman. I was only going to make that point about the voids when Councillor Ryan was saying that he didn't think we didn't know whether there were voids or not. I do remember seeing those pictures when we had the briefing meeting the other day. So it's pretty obvious that there were the voids, and as far as the chronology is concerned, I agree with you on that. I can't see any reason why why they shouldn't go ahead.
So, are there any other speakers who would like to address the committee?
Norton.
Thank you very much, Councillor McNaughton.
Yeah, just one thing that hasn't come up, I think, that I think it's worth getting clarification on. One of the points we considered last time, and something that's been raised again by the objector this time, is the proximity of two walls in terms of future maintenance and like if you need to redo the grouting or damp course or anything like that, might be made impossible by this. I think my question really is whether the fallback position, that the problem has already been passed by the fallback position, or whether this additional first floor element exacerbates that problem further. I can't quite tell from the diagrams we've got here, so I'd be grateful for some clarification on that.
Thank you, that's helpful. Mr. Osborne?
Chairman, in terms of the element that I think the objectors have raised concern, it's about the garage wall which sits along the flank, along the boundary with neighbours. That is in the same position as was granted under the fallback position for the extension. So that relationship has already been accepted. It's only a slight change of bringing it slightly further forward, which comes off the boundary. So the maintenance will be able to be taking place then. Thank you, Chairman.
Mute, Richard.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I don't see any other speakers. No other speakers. I think, shall we then move towards a vote? So the recommendation is approval subject to conditions. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
So Councillor Gough, I can't see your vote.
I'm voting for approval.
Okay, Councillor Holt, I can't see your vote.
I'm voting to approve. My hand's in the air.
Thank you. And Councillor Ryan, I can't see your vote.
Councillor Ryan is mute, but I don't think he's voting in favour.
Okay, so I have voting in favour Councillor Allen, Councillor Cole, Councillor Gough, Councillor Grinsell, Councillor Hall-Allen, Councillor Holt, Councillor McNaughton and Councillor Slater.
And all those against? Councillor Ryan is against.
Councillor Ryan is against, so that gives me 9 in total. So that is 8 in favour and 1 against, Chairman.
Okay, so the motion is carried. Thank you. So we are carrying on with our agenda to look at delegated decisions, pages 93 to 150. Could I ask for a commentary from Kim Allen, please?
Thank you, members. As per normal, our agenda pack provides all the other delegated decisions that have been made since our last meeting. So as you can see, I'm pleased to say there's a lot of them, which is brilliant. Because they were delegated, none reached the threshold for committee. So in my mind, they were all, reasonably uncontroversial. Thank you, Chairman.
There's nothing else on the agenda, so I think I'm right in saying, as far as I can tell. On that basis, I'd like to thank everyone for their cooperation this evening, in particular both members and officers. It's been quite an experience, and I wish everyone well, because obviously these are difficult times with health and that kind of thing. So keep safe and look after yourselves, and look forward to meeting you all at the next meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Good night. Good night.